Russian President Vladimir Putin has changed his country's legislation to allow convicted criminals to be conscripted into his country's army once released.
Germany's foreign minister says Vladimir Putin is the only one who can end the war as G7 ministers pledge continued support for Ukraine.
Hundreds of believers attended a mass conducted by Pope Francis during his first ever visit to Bahrain. Released convicts in Russia can now be conscripted to fight in Ukraine, according to a recent change to the country's legislation. This, as President Vladimir Putin praised his country's mobilization. While speaking to volunteers, he said out of 300,000 recruits, we already have 318,000 people. Why 318,000? Because volunteers are signing up. The number of volunteers is not going down. Putin also repeated an unfounded claim that some in Poland aspire to annex part of Ukraine. He made the accusation while speaking in front of like-minded civil and religious leaders and did not give any evidence. Warsaw has repeatedly denied the claim as misinformation.
German Foreign Minister Anna Baerbock said on Friday that Vladimir Putin alone can end the war in Ukraine. She was attending a meeting of G7 ministers in Münster. The seven rich nations also said they're working to implement a Russian oil price cap aimed at depriving Moscow of a key source of cash to fund its war. Baerbock pledged continuing support for Ukraine.
Dmytro Kuleba, my Ukrainian foreign minister colleague, who's also become a friend, was very clear yesterday about what Ukrainians need. That's why we're putting together packages for the winter period. We're supplying generators, heaters, housing containers, sewage treatment plants, water pumps and sanitary installations.
The G7 ministers also called on oil-producing states to increase production to help bring down prices, a month after OPEC Plus decided to drastically reduce its output.
Hundreds crowded into a cathedral in Bahrain to listen to a mass conducted by Pope Francis during his visit to the island nation. Bahrain, unlike its neighbor Saudi Arabia, allows Christians and Jews to exercise their faith publicly. It houses an estimated 80,000 Christians, most of whom are workers from southern Asia. Francis is on a 4-day trip to Bahrain, the main aim of which is to participate in a government-sponsored interfaith conference. But he will also spend part of his first ever visit to the country, ministering to its Catholic community. On the other side of Bahrain, protesters marched in the streets calling for political openness and rights in a country that has a de facto dictatorship. During his visit, Francis called for the country to abolish the death penalty and for basic rights to be guaranteed. Over 1,000 demonstrators gathered at the headquarters of Hungary's public media company to protest what they say is biased news coverage and state-sponsored propaganda. The demonstration, dubbed a blockade of the factory of lies, also called for better coverage of a recent wave of protests by Hungarian teachers and students, calling for better pay and working conditions. Thousands of demonstrators gathered in the Tunisian city of Zarzis to demand information about the 12 people who disappeared at sea a month and a half ago. Tunisia is a key departure point for people trying to cross the Mediterranean to Italy. According to local officials, over 10,000 migrants have made the crossing this year. The United States and its allies clashed with China and Russia at the UN Security Council on Friday over how to respond to North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches. The US's ambassador argued that Moscow and Beijing were protecting North Korea, and China's ambassador claimed the missiles are linked to joint US-South Korea military exercises.